Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to News Dose. And right away, we start the week off with Nintendo just creating havoc over the weekend. This is really a very frustrating situation for not only content creators like myself, but for much of the game community as Nintendo continues to target emulation, which in my opinion is extremely important because unlike these billion-dollar corporations, the emulation community has single-handedly preserved a lot of gaming history. So we're running into all of that today, as well as the PlayStation 5 Pro. It continues to make headlines for really, I'd say, all of the wrong reasons. Though I will also say at the same time, this one really surprised me. Let's just go and get right into things, though, starting off with Starfield Shattered Space. I'd say that Starfield is debatably Xbox's most important game for the Xbox Series X, or at least out of the games that they've released so far this generation. And Shattered Space is officially available today. So this is its first big expansion, and the way they're kind of advertising it is that it's more of a horror-like experience in a secluded environment. It almost kind of seems like Bethesda is slimming things down to the way their previous games were made. So if anything else, if you like other Bethesda games, then maybe Shattered Space might be something that piques your interest. Now, I'll say right away, I haven't played it yet. I think it looks interesting, but there's a few other games that I'm still currently working on, so hopefully I'll get to it soon. But if you've played it, let me hear your thoughts about it in the comments below, and whether or not you feel like it's lived up to the hype. Now, next up here, if you know anything about me, you might know that I enjoy the Final Fantasy franchise. Honestly, I'd probably list it in my top 10 franchises ever made, if not even my top 5. I'd really have to think about that one, but obviously, like a lot of other people, I do feel like this series peaked at Final Fantasy IX. Not necessarily because it's my favorite entry, because it's not, but rather it's because after Final Fantasy IX, I feel like the series has been a little less consistent than what it was prior. I mean, I still think that 10, 13, 15, and 16 are all good games, but I definitely don't think they're as good as that 6 through 9 stretch. And I think that's one of the really cool things about what Square Enix is doing. Similar to how Capcom has approached the Resident Evil franchise, Square Enix is reviving some of those classic Final Fantasy games, and they're completely transforming them in a special way, as we're seeing with Final Fantasy VII. Now, if you don't already know, there's been a lot of rumors that Final Fantasy IX could be the next game to get that remake treatment, though there are still some questions that comes along with that. And in fact, Square Enix's Yoshida might have just tipped his hat for one of those big-time questions. He was recently asked about which Final Fantasy he would most like to remake, and this was his response. Oh man, that is a super tough question. The one that I would like to make myself would be Final Fantasy III, I think. Of course, I do know there are requests for Final Fantasy IX to be made, but when you think about Final Fantasy IX, it's a game with huge volume. When you think about all that volume, I wonder if it's possible to remake that as a single title. It's a difficult one. It is a tough question. So given his response here, if those rumors do line up about the Final Fantasy remake, if that's actually true, this could be a similar setup as to what we're seeing with Final Fantasy VII. It could actually end up being a several-part series, which, depending on how you look at that could maybe be a good thing or even a bad thing. I personally view it as a good thing just because I like how they've expanded Final Fantasy VII. The characters are much more fleshed out, but at the same time, I can also see where some fans might be a little bit disappointed as well. If you're a Final Fantasy fan, specifically with Final Fantasy IX, let me hear your thoughts about this in the comments below. Now, actually, speaking of Square Enix, just earlier this month, we got Astro Bot, which, in my opinion, is an excellent game. I really cannot recommend it enough. But one thing that a lot of fans have noticed is that Square Enix is completely absent. A big part of Astro Bot is really all about the different cosplays for characters that appears on a PlayStation console. And of course, Square Enix is a huge part of PlayStation's history. So it is a little bit bizarre that they have no representation at all, even more so because they did in Astro's Playroom. And so Asobi was asked about this, and they simply said, it's difficult to comment on that. We really respect the choice of each publisher. So, in other words, it seems like Square Enix chose not to be a part of Astro Bot, which to me, honestly, I think that was a fumble on their part. It feels like it's kind of free advertisement for them, but this does kind of beg the question whether or not Square Enix and Sony has a good relationship together right now. Now, in my opinion, I think their work relationship is probably fine in the sense that Sony is still Square Enix's most important platform because they have more affinity with them than anybody else, or at least when it comes to their bigger games. But I think that might also be the problem here. We know for a fact that Square Enix wants to be a more multi-platform focused company, and maybe this decision was a part of that focus. They no longer want to be viewed as a PlayStation first brand because that hasn't exactly worked out for them this generation. You have games like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and 16, which both underperformed. And then there's Forspoken, and that one just completely flopped. Though honestly, I don't really think being multi-platform would have saved that game specifically. But my point being, I think they're maybe trying to separate their image from being viewed as this PlayStation first studio. Now that's just my immediate guess here, I'm just simply speculating. But who knows, maybe they'll show up in a future Astrobot DLC. Okay, so let's go talk about this Nintendo situation. And I think there's going to be some differing opinions on this topic. This really deals with a morally gray area within gaming, and of course, I'm talking about emulation. Now, some people like emulation, some people think it's shady. That really just kind of depends on the person. But for me, I am a big supporter of emulation. Now, I definitely don't promote piracy. That's not the type of person that I am, but I do like emulation. In my opinion, it's not only a great way to preserve games, which the game industry has done a very poor job with, but it also gives you more options over the games that you own. As one such example, I own a copy of Zelda Wind Waker HD and also Zelda Twilight Princess HD for the Wii U. And I've wanted these games on the Switch for years because I want to be able to play them on a handheld console. And despite Nintendo's unwillingness to give us those games this generation, you can instead play these on something like the Steam Deck, which I've done myself. They run amazingly well on the Steam Deck combined with the Cemu emulator. Now, another benefit of emulation is that you don't necessarily have to completely rely on aging hardware. Over time, there is a good chance that your aging hardware will no longer work. As an example for me, I own a lot of GameCube games, but my GameCube that I got back in 2004 no longer works. So once again, emulation kind of comes to the rescue here. So that's why it pains me to see one of the best emulation channels get targeted by Nintendo. Now, I'll be honest with you all, I don't really watch a lot of different YouTubers, but one channel that I really enjoy is Retro Gamecore. Not even because I necessarily buy the stuff that he talks about, but he just does such an amazing job talking about all of these different emulation handhelds, and I just really enjoy watching his content. In fact, there's an emulation handheld that I'm currently interested in, the Ioneo Micro Pocket. I'm a big fan of Game Boy Advance, and this really kind of seems like a premium Game Boy Advance emulator. So I shot Russ a message over the weekend because I had a question for him. Now, he doesn't even know who I am, but he did respond to me despite having 500,000+ subscribers. Now, I'm sure he gets a ton of other messages, but even still, he took the time to respond to my question. And the reason I tell you that is because I think this just kind of speaks to the person that he is. He really just kind of seems like a level-headed, nice guy. And that's the person that Nintendo is currently targeting. He posted this over the weekend. Hi, friends. Well, it does appear that my worst fears are true, and that I am being specifically targeted by Nintendo. My Wii U video was taken down, and I received another copyright strike, even though this showcase video was no different than all of the tech demos and reviews I have made on this channel previously. I am still considering a counterclaim under fair use, as the video was for educational use, transformative in nature, and had no effect on the market. It was a demonstration of a console no longer for sale. Even the Wii U shop is closed, so the company itself has no means of earning revenue from Wii U sales. However, I am reluctant to open that can of worms with a multi-billion-dollar corporation, as their next step would be to file legal action. So now he has to change how he makes his videos, which really is such a shame. I mean, I've watched a lot of his stuff, and he might have some B-roll footage of a Nintendo game running on an emulation handheld, but he's never encouraged any kind of piracy. So it's really just such a shame that Nintendo can copyright these lengthy videos for seconds. Yes, just seconds worth of footage. As a content creator, that's really where I get frustrated with YouTube specifically, because they don't really protect their content creators. And now you have somebody like Retro Gamecore, and he has 2 copyright strikes. So he has to kind of fear what Nintendo could possibly do next, or at least for the next 6 months, which is, again, honestly, just such a shame. Legally, I don't really think Nintendo is just here. But because they're this billion-dollar corporation, it's scary for us content creators to fight back. And it's things like this why I always kind of tell you all, these companies are not our friends. I mean, I love Nintendo's content. I think they make some amazing games. I grew up as a Nintendo kid, and they still make some of my favorite games all of these years later. But I'm also very aware that they don't care about me, and neither do these other companies as well. The only thing that these companies care about is their bottom line. And right now, that's what Nintendo is thinking about the most. They're basically trying to turn one of the best emulation channels into an example to kind of strike fear in all of these other emulation groups. But that's kind of the thing that we've seen throughout 2024. Nintendo is definitely targeting emulation right now, and I think that's a scary thought as a gamer. Let me know what you all think about this situation. No, personally, I think it's frustrating, but let me know what you all think about this in the comments below. Now, one last thing before we go, though, I want to talk about the PlayStation 5 Pro because I was wrong. Yes, I was absolutely wrong. When they first announced the PS5 Pro and its price tag, I said right away, yes, its price is absolutely ridiculous. But even still, I 100% expected it to sell out this holiday. I figured, like most other hardware, it would be difficult to get until after the holidays. But clearly, that's not the case at all. Pre-orders went up on PlayStation Direct last Thursday, and here we are 4 days later, and as of this recording, it is still available. I mean, the 30th anniversary edition sold out immediately as it was incredibly limited. We all knew the price was going to go up on that thing. But as for the regular PlayStation 5 Pro, it's still readily available. And that's the thing here, because pre-orders haven't even opened up for other retailers yet. You know, this is not available on Amazon and Best Buy, Target, and all these other places. That all begins on October 10th. So seemingly, it's going to get even easier to find here soon enough. And I think that kind of tells me one of two things. The PlayStation 5 Pro is either just not selling very well because of its high price tag, or they made just a ton of units to meet demand. Now, I have seen people say, well, you know, this is just a mid-generation refresh, so I don't know why anybody expected it to sell out. But if you look back at the PlayStation 4 Pro and the Xbox One X last generation, they did initially sell out of that first wave. Really, I think the big difference with those consoles compared to the PlayStation 5 Pro is that they were fairly priced. And that's why I lean on the side. I think there's just less demand this time around. You know, last generation, the PS4 Pro was about 15% of the entire PlayStation 4 install base. So, you know, we already know that these are niche products. But I think with the higher price tag for the PlayStation 5 Pro, we will see a lower percentage for the PlayStation 5 Pro. I mean, it might even be lower than 10% this time, which, you know, who knows if that's a success for Sony or not. We'd have to hear from them specifically. But I think this does kind of line up with its online response. Again, if you go back and look at the PlayStation 4 Pro showcase reveal, its like to dislike ratio is very positive. 17,000 likes to just 784 dislikes. And then when you compare that to the PlayStation 5 Pro reveal, it is a night and day difference, which clearly corresponds with its price tag. That's the big talking point right now. People are just not happy with its $700 to $800 asking price. So, I mean, you know, if anything else here, if you're on the fence for the PlayStation 5 Pro, you don't necessarily have to be in any kind of rush to pre-order it. Anyways, though, that's going to be it for this episode, but do make sure to hit that subscribe button, and until next time, peace out.